Hey guys, it's Friday, so let's dig into a conversation, a good question at questions@lighthousebaptist.net. If you want to link to the website or anything else, it's all down below. So this is a great question. I have a question regarding 2 Peter 2:4. Yeah, we all have questions about that. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to the pits of darkness reserved for judgment, so if God cast the fallen angels into hell until judgment, then why wasn't Satan already cast into hell before he could tempt Adam and Eve in the garden? And if the fallen angels are committed to pits of darkness right now, what are the demons that we know exist in the spiritual realm and have even possessed people? Are they different from angels? If so, where did they come from? Okay, let's talk a little bit about these angels that he's referring to. We're going to have to talk a little bit about the intertestamental book of First and Second Enoch. We're going to have to go back and consider Deuteronomy 6, which is clearly the strangest story in the scriptures. But before we do all that, or like maybe not before, but while we're doing all that, let's not miss the plain point of Second Peter chapter 2, and that is simply this. Hey, false teachers. Hey, those who would proclaim to be speaking on behalf of God, teaching the scriptures, and yet using that for selfish means, for your own gain. Man, would you please pay attention to the fact that God did not spare angels who rebelled, that God did not spare those in antiquity that rebelled. And God will hold accountable people who teach the scriptures, who purport themselves to be people who speak for God and yet do it for selfish reasons. You would do well to think deeply that God did not spare angels or people, and we will not be spared either. We are need to be very sure that when we teach, we're not heretics. So let's read. Let's start with. So let's get into what the deal is with these angels. So 2 Peter 4:2-4 and following. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness until to be kept until judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ash, he condemned them to extinction, making an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. So, do you see what Peter's doing here? He's saying, guys, I want you to think that this God of love is also the God of judgment. Would you remember that he didn't spare the ungodly in Noah's time? And okay, so he's already using like the time of Noah as an example. Then he says, and also think about Sodom and Gomorrah. God is love, and God also will not be mocked. And so he has us thinking about what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah that was so reprehensible to God that that he struck in that kind of judgment. He wants these heretics in the church to pay attention and say, guys, God will not be mocked. You can't use this stuff just for your own means. Let's turn over to Jude for a second, because Jude has an almost parallel, a parallel passage that's almost identical but has a couple differences. Jude verse 5. Now I want to remind you all, though, you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved a people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. Man, God is not a joke. Like, God is not a pushover. God will not be mocked, and it is the only right thing to do is to worship him. And the angels, so verse 6, and the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under the gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. So this, he has added something about, gives us a little understanding of what the angels did wrong. There's a group of angels apparently that left their proper place of authority, and this is why they're being judged. Again, Jude wants to get us thinking about, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities surrounding, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desires, served as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. So these are intense words. And Jude and Peter both want to get us thinking about the might and the holiness of God that will not be mocked. And so he's going to point us to what happened at Sodom and Gomorrah. He's going to point us to what happened at the flood. And then he's going to point us to this group of angels who left their position and sinned and have been in jail awaiting the judgment since then. Well, who could this be talking about? You know, when you see things that are that closely linked, you can usually say, okay, Peter and Jude they're quoting from a common thing. There's something available to them that they all know about. They're dipping into the literature of their time and quoting from it. And that's exactly what happened. There was a book, the writings of Enoch, the books of 1st and 2nd Enoch that were intertestamental. They're part of the pseudepigrapha, so Enoch didn't really write them, but they're written kind of in his voice. They come thousands of years after the biblical character of Enoch, and yet they make good commentary on in a way that the early church would appreciate, would agree with these writings. Not that they were canon, and you know, we might say, well, that's weird. Is it true or is it not? Well, it can be true and not be canon. Do you remember, or maybe you would consider that while the Bible is the only, you know, pure source of truth, it's the only canon we have, and yet you might have a favorite commentary that you go, oh, well, you know, as I preach, I might say, hey, well, D.L. Moody said this, or Tim Keller said this, or you know, John Calvin said this, or, you know, some great thinker, you might quote them and say, hey, I want you to consider this. Well, this is what Jude and Peter are doing. And they are quoting Enoch, referring to the incident in Deuteronomy 6, where the sons of God come down and impregnate the daughters of man, that is really one of the inciting incidents that causes all the drama in the Old Testament. So while in Deuteronomy 6 we don't have the specific punishment for this one particular group of angels who left their position, they came down where they weren't supposed to be and behaved similarly to the people in Sodom and Gomorrah in a godless way, like people before the flood, and we don't have their particular punishment in Deuteronomy 6, and yet Enoch would tell us what happened is that they have been chained in Hades, in this place of gloom. They have been imprisoned, and that they are awaiting judgment. So what Peter is referring to is not all of the fallen angels or all of the demons. He's referring to this group of fallen angels that did this particular thing in Deuteronomy 6, have a particular punishment, and the point still remains. The point is still, guys, God did not spare these angels. He's not going to spare being mocked by us either. You know, just as kind of finishing the thought about this, we might say, well, you know, how does that relate to, you know, Satan and what's going on in Eden and what's going on now? I mean, the Bible is very clear that Satan is active today, that that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and forces of darkness in the heavenly realms. You have the story of an adversary at the throne room of God at the beginning of Job. Like, there is no shortage of evil in the world. There's no shortage of volitional evil in the world. The Bible would tell us that there are plenty of spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms that are active and are going to be judged someday. And yet, this one particular group in Deuteronomy 6 had this one particular punishment. So why don't we just wrap up by remembering what these passages are about? These passages are not intended to make us understand the entire spiritual realm. Rather, these passages are to remind us of the holiness of God, to remind us of the importance of worshiping God and God alone, to understand the severity of God's holiness as we rebel. And ultimately, that turns us to the incredible work of the cross and the empty tomb. See, this is the only thing that saves us. You and I, we're not better than these angels. Rather, you and I have the opportunity to overcome punishment because of the work of Christ on the cross, because of the power of God at the empty tomb. So, God has extended us something that he did not extend to those angels. And that is a chance to repent, a chance to turn and say, God, I don't want to live my life for me. Rather, I want to live my life for you. And to not experience the judgment that these angels are looking forward to, but rather to experience judgment and reward. So, Deuteronomy 6, very strange. 2 Peter, pretty difficult. The point, not hard to understand. God is holy. The good life is worshiping him. He will not be mocked. Hey, beloved,